Story 1. Late evening, maybe a decade ago, I ended up running silent to a call with additional units in tow. The caller reported hearing footsteps on her second floor when she was in the kitchen. She lived alone, middle-aged, divorced, no kids, and had no expected company. She is outside across the street when we arrive, obviously unnerved and being calmed by her neighbor. Other units showed up almost as I did and set up a perimeter at the corners of the property. We talk with her, get permission to enter, so we decide we'll announce ourselves and clear the house. Three of us stack up on the front door, announce and make entry, while the other officers are viewing the windows from a distance under concealment. She was in the midst of making a really late dinner, so the house smells really good. I remember how good it smelled. Anyway, we clear the ground level and make our way to the stairs when we hear it. Obviously footsteps on the wood floors above us, not a panicky, "Oh shit, I'm caught" footsteps, and running to hide or escape. No, these were calm, methodic, and almost pace-like. We announce ourselves again and no response, except the pacing just starts to sort of fade away. Quietly, I make my way up the steps, adrenaline pumping, and concentrating on pieing the corner at the top. I stop a few stairs shy of the corner, breathe, and proceed up. The hallway at the top was pitch black, and after successfully clearing the top/corner, we make our way down the hallway clearing rooms. Nothing. Nobody. Not even a critter. Not that any critter would ever make what I describe as human footsteps on hardwood. After the initial search, a few of the other officers involved also checked every nook and cranny. Bed, closet, rack, hell, even the washer, dryer, appliances, and cupboards were thoroughly searched. Nothing was out of order. Nobody was hiding anywhere. Eventually, we invite the lady back into her residence and reassure her that there was nobody in there, and we equated her noise to maybe wood shrinkage or expansion in the home. None of the officers outside and after our initial search had seen anybody leave the top or bottom floors or windows. The house had no indications that anybody tried to force open a window or door. I stayed behind for about 30 minutes once the other officers cleared the call and waited while her friend showed up to stay the night with her. I went over basic security measures with her and double-checked all her windows and doors were not compromised. She fed me well-done lasagna as I waited, and to this day, I'm convinced that I interacted with another dimension of life that day. Story 2, about 4 years ago, a lady who I'll call Lucy called our non-emergency line and said she locked herself out of her house. I responded to take the report in case FD needed to force entry. I arrived first and immediately noticed a burning candle and some Jesus-y statues in the upstairs window. The light in this room was also on. I can't explain it, but it seemed a bit odd to me. Anyways, I approached Lucy, who appeared to be about 65 years old, and asked what happened. She said she walked to her car to get groceries for her and her mother, but forgot her keys inside and the door had locked behind her. I asked if her mother was home, and Lucy replied in the affirmative. Lucy went on to say she technically lived alone because her mom died 6 years prior, but she still lives with her in the bedroom with a lit candle and makes her presence known by turning on, off lights, opening, closing doors, and turning on the bathroom faucet. I then walked the perimeter of the home and found an unlocked window into the kitchen. Since Lucy never actually left home and knew no one else was inside, I radioed dispatch and climbed in through the window with her consent. As my boot touched the kitchen floor, I heard an audible click. At the same time, the lights in the stairway and upstairs hallway to my left turned off. I quickly walked to the rear sliding door to my right and advised Lucy what had happened. Lucy laughed and said that was just her mom saying hello. I told Lucy that although I genuinely believed what she told me was true, I still had to do my due diligence and ensure no one else was inside. I radioed for a back, and within minutes my buddy arrived. The first thing he asked about was the lit candle in the window. While clearing the upstairs, we came upon the room where the candle was and immediately noticed it was blown out. There were no open windows, fans, vents, or other obvious source that could have extinguished the flame. We just looked at each other with a bit of unease and went back downstairs to leave. Click, the upstairs lights turned off behind us. We talked to Lucy for another 5 minutes and suggested getting a battery-operated candle just to be safe. Well, Lucy clearly thought fuck the police because, to this day, that candle burns in the open window most nights when I drive by. And every now and then I'll stop and talk to Lucy to see how she and her mother are doing. Story 3. So not LE, but I worked security for a few years out of high school and have some weird ones. So me and another guard became pretty good friends and would often talk to each other over the phone and earpiece for most of the night while patrolling. One time he found a door to the basement of the oldest building in our state or city or something like that, and the basement was also infamously haunted. Now he hadn't said anything about what he was doing other than which building he was at, and we had been silent for a few minutes when I heard over the phone the word door being whispered / hissed in a drawn-out way with an audible inhale/exhale at the end. At first I thought it was him and asked him to repeat himself, and he was confused and said that he hadn't said anything. I didn't want to freak him out, so I didn't say anything until after he'd left the building about what I'd heard. He was pretty freaked out by it, and it would have been very out of character for him to have done that to fuck with me. Another one that was most likely just a weird coincidence. We were transporting a psych patient from an ER to a psyche facility who was completely fucked out of his mind, mostly unaware of everything around him, and verbal but not making any sense, and in an almost sleepwalking headspace from appearances. The nurses had doped him up, but said he'd been in the same mental state, just more agitated beforehand. The antipsychotics had only really calmed him down. The first thing he does after loading him in the vehicle and me sitting down next to him was turn to me, appearing suddenly lucid, and saying conversationally, "Well, you look like you're ready to bury another dog." The morning of, I'd found my dog passed away in her sleep and had buried her. After looking at me expectantly for a few moments, while I was a little confused and shocked, the appearance of lucidity on his face and eyes slowly faded away before he turned back to mumbling and rocking back and forth and trying to eat the bag of chips the nurses sent with him. Not the chips out of the bag, mind you, but the bag of chips. My least favorite building to patrol at night very often would have doors unlocked on my second and third patrols after I'd found them locked beforehand. Many times bay doors, which required a latch to be lifted from the inside, would be unlocked. The building had alarms attached to every door that I'd have to disarm every time I opened one of the doors, so they worked. The building owners were not concerned in the least and simply said that the doors did that, and that's why they hired us to keep them locked. If it had been employees opening one of the entrance doors, then I would have been able to see which employee and at what time they'd been unlocked, which happened occasionally, but I'd always been informed to expect that on the nights it occurred. I'd also hear hissing noises, thumping from the roof, and the occasional bay door being shaken as though by wind, but with none of the bay doors next to it being shaken. That place creeped me the fuck out. The guard before me had quit at 2 in the morning after ending a patrol at that site halfway through, a few weeks after getting promoted to lieutenant, driven straight back to the office and left his gear and letter of resignation and refused to return any calls. I had a friend who was good friends with that guard and asked him if he knew what happened. He just said that the guard refused to talk about it. Another time we were going to pick up a psyche patient from an ER, and when passing the hospital morgue during either late night or early morning, heard loud sobbing coming from in there. We flagged down a nurse and told them, who called the hospital security to come check it out, and they found nothing. The hallway the morgue was in had a few other rooms that were all locked and closed, but the sound had seemed to be coming directly from the morgue. Another site I would patrol at night was an outdoor theater at the edge of town. A body had been found on an undeveloped part of the grounds and was thought to be a victim of Ted Bundy, as the time and area of death matched up with when Ted Bundy was in the area and active. However, it was never proven. This place was creepy as fuck, and I didn't even know about the murder until after I'd been working it for a while. Now I'm very used to being outside at night in a rural area where there's no electric lights, but this place had this oppressive darkness that seemed to absorb any light. Even on nights with a full moon, I had to use a flashlight to be able to see anything, and even my flashlight seemed to have less reach and illumination there. Apart from the weird darkness, there was only ever one unexplained incident. It was the first night I was patrolling there. I'd stopped halfway through my patrol to have a smoke break and turned off my flashlight because the battery was running low. After finishing my cigarette, I went back to my patrol and turned my flashlight on and froze. Alarm bells started to go off in my head, but I wasn't sure why. I hadn't heard or seen anything, but I just had this strong feeling that something was off. Then I realized what it was. My shadow was being cast out in front of me, as though there was a light shining on me from behind. I yelped and jumped around, bringing my hands up, thinking there was somebody behind me, but there was nothing. I didn't see anything that would have cast my shadow that direction, and I didn't fuck around to see if my shadow would keep on doing that. I turned my light off and returned to my car, using my much dimmer phone light to see because I didn't want to see my shadow in front of me again, lol. I never had that happen again at that property, and later tried to recreate it in the same position with no luck. And other than just being creepy and weirdly dark, there were no more incidents that I couldn't find a rational explanation for at that site, although a mountain lion's screams and a guy proposing to his fiancée, both about, gave me heart attacks there. Story 4. I am a police officer working on an emergency response team on a busy London borough. We took a call to a suspected domestic incident in a block of flats. The informant said that she could hear screaming and sounds of disturbance coming from the flat above her own. Once we arrived, my colleague and I knocked on the door of the flat. The informant said the noise was coming from. I had heard nothing on my way up and certainly couldn't hear any disturbance coming from the address. To be honest, I heard nothing at all. After knocking twice, we had no response. My colleague left me to go downstairs and speak directly to the informant. I stayed by the door. I knocked again, and after some time it was answered by an elderly woman. She had clearly been asleep and was alarmed to see me standing outside. I told her that someone had called saying that they could hear a disturbance coming from within her address. I asked her if there was anyone else inside with her. She looked bemused and told me that she lived alone and had been sleeping. I asked her if I could come in to satisfy myself that no one else was there. She invited me in, and I walked into what was a small 2-bedroom flat. The flat was in darkness apart from her hall light and her bedside lamp. I began searching through the flat. As I approached the final door, the living room, my colleague called me up on the radio. He told me that he was on his way and asked if I was okay. I told him everything was fine, wondering why he sounded so flustered. He told me that he was with the informant and could also hear screaming and loud thuds coming from the flat I was in. I told him that he must be mistaken as I was almost done searching the flat and that I had heard nothing whatsoever. I have to admit a feeling of unease as I opened the final door. Like all the other rooms, it was in darkness but was freezing cold. My breath misted immediately. There was no one in the room and no signs of disturbance. No window was open. I called my colleague and asked him to listen out for my footfall. He said he could hear my feet as I stamped them, but said that the screaming had stopped. This coincided with me opening the door. I left shortly after apologizing to the elderly woman for waking her. I have no rational explanation for this at all. My colleague and I left feeling very creeped out. Story 5. I worked at the Naval Hospital in Camp Pendleton in 2013. I was part of the transition team that moved the last of the belongings that they wanted from their old location to their new one. Along with others on my team, we were part of the final sweep as far as cleaning up, waxing the floors, and locking up some of the higher-level rooms within the old hospital. It was a nice gig because there was a ton of office supplies that was going to just get thrown away along with some office chairs. I like to draw, so I took home 2 chairs, one for me and one for my roommate, along with a plethora of pens and paper. In my duty section, there was also the security role of watching over the barracks that was just outside of the hospital. With the Navy being the Navy, they didn't transfer anyone over to the new barracks till about a full 8 months after the move to the new hospital. So someone still had to stand duty there as well as patrol the old hospital as to keep away any would-be vandals from a place they thought was completely abandoned. Of course, I would end up getting duty one day and would start getting people coming into the commons area telling to go look at the hospital. There was very clearly a light on in 6th or 7th floor with a figure standing motionless, watching outside. I put up a sign to say that I would be leaving the office and to call my personal number should they need anything. Usually it was just to reset their key cards, but each room had 4 rooms within it, so usually people just called their roommates to open the doors instead of waiting for the process of me resetting their key card. It was already pretty late at night, so I wasn't worried about it. I would go to the hospital and it was still completely locked all around. I checked to make sure that no windows were ajar, but the hospital didn't have any that opened. I even tried to lift the back hatch that linens and new supplies came through by truck, and that was still secured. I had no other way of getting in myself, so when my chief came down around 2 a.m., as they seldomly did, but were required to at least once a night, I made a report of it. By this time, the figure was gone, but the light remained on. I was never told if they ever found anyone or if it was even followed up on for that matter. But it was one of the creepiest things I remember from being there.
Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.